Hey there, before you watch this video, I would highly recommend checking out the one that I made before about what I like in video games. Aside from offering some perspective on my approach to games, it also explains the general ethos of my analysis, and will better prime you for what to expect from this video. Let me also tell you up front that I'm not particularly a fan of any Mario games, nor do I think most 3D platformers hold up all that well. Odyssey might be a contender for one of the best 3D platformers ever made, in my opinion, just because the controls are so tight and there aren't any frustratingly dated death mechanics to make it overly infuriating. But it also makes me realize that it might not even be possible to create a meaningful challenge around these type of controls that isn't unduly frustrating up to the point that you've completely mastered them, but I've gotten way the hell ahead of myself. The first time I saw the starting area in Mario Odyssey, I was unpleasantly surprised. This strangely flat, drably colored nighttime hat ghost village seemingly isolated in the clouds inspired none of the instant wonderment which I'd remembered feeling towards Peach's Castle or Delfino Plaza in Mario 64 and Sunshine respectively. It took a while for me to understand what I felt I was missing, and that thing was grounding. Each of those games quickly engrossed you into a home base setting that gave it an immediate sense of place and something like a normal state, which could then be contrasted by the actual levels. Mario Odyssey has two good reasons not to be that way, but I think it bombs the execution on both. One is that it's meant to feel like a massive, sprawling adventure, as the title implies, but it doesn't. There aren't actually very many stages, most of them are tiny, and you can blast through the story mode in like a day and a half on your first go with no trouble at all, as I did. Secondly, many of these levels are sort of hubs in themselves, or even have a section that is specifically a town. The problem with these is that none of them are fleshed out or big enough to feel like a fun place to hang out in. Peach's Castle and Delfino Plaza were fun just to wander around and see what kind of secrets you could find in this familiar area until you had a firm sense of it. The closest Odyssey comes to a feeling like that is in the densely multi-layered Metro City, but even there the stage feels weirdly small considering the concept is that it's based on New York. Let me not give the impression though that I think they changed it and now it's bad. I'm only comparing it to the older games to give a sense of what could have been that isn't, so that we can examine what it's been replaced with and whether that thing is as good as what we've had before. Theoretically, a sprawling, globe-trotting Mario adventure through diverse and imaginative worlds sounds like a perfect idea, but it just doesn't live up to its promise. Most shocking to me is just how aesthetically uninteresting and underdeveloped some of these places are. Cascade Kingdom is certainly the worst offender. Going by the name and certain dialogue, it should be noteworthy for its waterfall, but I hardly even registered the thing when I was there at first. It's not as though it's particularly large or visually noteworthy, it serves no apparent gameplay purpose and hardly takes up much of the level. The clothes you can buy at this stage turn Mario into a caveman, which has nothing at all to do with the waterfall theme. As far as prehistoric theming goes, there are some fossils around, I guess, and you can possess a T-Rex, but mostly this place just feels like a generic rock structure that you'd find in any random game. The dirt and grass textures are hideously ugly. Recent Nintendo games have repeatedly done this strange thing where they put a shiny, almost metallic sheen on everything that doesn't match the aesthetic of what it's being applied to. This combination of dry brown and bright green with that metallic effect is just garish in my opinion, as is the chaotic mishmash of design elements laid on top of it. We've got a fairly realistic environment, which the photorealistic T-Rex might have felt at home in at least, but it's also full of decidedly Mario enemy designs and bright flashing collectibles. The T-Rex is poorly rendered and animated and controls like shit, and the area which you can use it in is frustratingly small. At least the Chain Chomps are actually a bit more exciting as a player of old Mario games, because of how you can flippantly take control of one of the scariest enemies from the old games and ram them into walls, which compared to the T-Rex is actually a gameplay mechanic, if a simple one. But none of the transformations ever end up leading to much more than that one does. Usually Mario takes the form of a creature capable of exactly one task, and many of these are very similar or just extremely shallow. Only a couple are complex enough to have any new gameplay challenges based around them, and even then they are only explored up to slightly above basic competency with the controls. Let us consider the structure of a great platformer game like Mega Man X. As you progress through the game, you acquire new powers which change the way you can engage with its challenges, not only in the linear sense of being able to do something new, but also in that you can combine each new ability you've gained with abilities that you already have, and the challenges accordingly are built around testing your skill with using these abilities in combination. In Mario Odyssey, none of the new abilities gained by possessing monsters are combined with the ones that you already have, nor with each other. They are only useful in conquering the challenges built around those specific powers, meaning that you're essentially playing a completely different game when you're you're inside one of these bodies. This isn't a problem in and of itself, but none of those games is very fleshed out or interesting, nor are the mechanics particularly unique. Only a couple of them are even enough fun to play with or used in enough interesting scenarios to be remembered afterwards. So in light of all that, how can I still claim that Mario Odyssey is one of the best 3D platformers? Well, its baseline control scheme is one of the most robust in any 3D game, and there are no shortage of challenges which push you to learn them up to, again, at least a decent level of competence. Not much in the game is built to really push your mastery of the controls, but they are at least designed in such a way that a master can have a very different experience with each challenge than a less experienced player. The incentive to master the controls is less about being able to do everything in the game and more about being able to do it with style. This can be incredibly satisfying, and it legitimately takes a lot of practice to reach a point where you can pull off the really crazy movements. It is for this reason that I can, if nothing else, easily appreciate what other players love about this game so much. If you find these controls satisfying to play with and you have the patience to master them, the catharsis must be massive, but I am not that player. There are some video games which I have found myself compelled to play continually until reaching a state of mastery, because the baseline experience was already so satisfying to begin with. It isn't a tall order for me to spend a lot of time playing in those cases because I'm having fun already and just want to have even more fun. Other games I find are frustrating to play at a lower level of competence and only seem like they would get fun once you've already put in the work to overcome the learning curve. Historically, Mario games have been a lot more frustrating to master because of how obnoxiously they would punish failure, but Mario Odyssey is significantly less stressful in this regard. The only problem is just that I don't really think it's enough fun to throw myself at its tougher challenges to even want to keep trying them over and over. The controls require too much precision and perfectly timed button presses that a clumsy fuck like me particularly struggles with, and I'm just not so endeared to the game as to commit myself. This is what I meant at the start when I talked about how 3D platformers maybe can't even achieve a higher level of challenge without inviting more frustration than I think they're worth. I've been able to power through 2D platformers because it's easy to figure out where you went wrong and to make subtle corrections on your way to mastering a particular challenge. When you're in 3D, there's a lot more that can go wrong and to keep track of, and all of the controls do something slightly different depending on the perspective of the camera. Figuring out which camera angle would be best to maintain on a particular challenge isn't a consideration I find all that engaging to have to make. But this isn't to say that I don't find inherent value in the idea of the 3D platformer either. One of the coolest things about video games is exploring spatial awareness. It's inherently interesting to run around and find things and to get the lay of an environment. Plenty of genres take advantage of this, from action-adventure titles like Tomb Raider to action RPGs like Nier. Mario Odyssey does not give a shit about the fact that some people are dismissive of so-called collectathons, and instead is dedicated to capturing their appeal, that being to reward the constant curiosity of the player to examine every square inch of the environment and not let anything pass them. I appreciate the appeal of this, but I also feel Mario Odyssey makes a weird swerve when it comes to the way these collectibles are ordinarily stratified by value. Banjo-Kazooie handled this perfectly. There were many different types of collectibles which were valuable for different reasons, and some of those reasons were totally optional to engage with. Mario Odyssey does have the two different types of coins used to buy things in the shop, and while the regular coins are so abundant that you can easily farm them, the limited number special coins in each stage make for a good optional challenge if you want all of Mario's outfits and ship trinkets. But these are the only things that aren't moons, which you acquire constantly. A lot of moons you'll get just for being even remotely observant of your surroundings, or even are just out in the open for no apparent reason. Others are at the end of more serious challenges, with the 3-in-1 multi-moons reserved for boss fights. I understand that Nintendo did things this way because they were going to require a certain number of moons for the ship to continue to each new level, and they wanted the game to be easy enough for children to beat, but they took it to a far-flung extreme where the value of moons seems completely negligible. I collected 250 moons to unlock the dark side of the moon level, meaning about 120 more than were necessary to complete the game, and I still felt like I'd never really been pressed into a real challenge. If I were to come across a room that was giving me trouble, I can easily justify abandoning it for something else because I know that there are other easier moons all over the place. The game needed some kind of higher reward than moons that could only be obtained by beating the most serious challenges and which unlocks something useful. You could argue that some things are only unlockable once you've collected every single moon, meaning that you will eventually be pushed into those challenges if you're aiming for completion, but that's a hell of a lot of game to dedicate yourself to in pursuit of of finding both a more meaningful challenge and a legitimate reason to conquer it. This brings me around again to the odd way that Mario Odyssey is structured. Lately, Nintendo has a tendency to break their games into a very easily completed main game and an elaborate post-game, seemingly so that casual players and children can have the experience of beating the game without getting stumped, while hardcore players can just go on challenging themselves for the sake of itself. It's kind of a genius idea, but for players like me who generally like to just play a satisfying story mode in a single go and not really push all the way to completion, it leaves the main quest feeling flimsy and unfulfilling. It was odd to me at first that this game didn't take something more akin to the Mario 64 approach, wherein you could unlock whichever levels you had enough stars for in each area as soon as you got there, and didn't necessarily have to play the levels in order, because you could collect all the stars in one area first and ignore the stars in another. Instead, in Odyssey, you have to play the stages one at a time in order, with just a couple of parts where the game asks you to pick one of two options of where to go, even though you have no basis to make a decision about it since you haven't surveyed either one yet. In Mario 64, you might have had 3 stages unlocked and needed a few more stars to get to the 4th, so you picked whichever stage you liked the most to continue exploring for stars. In Mario Odyssey, you never have this option. That is, until the post-game, when you no longer need the moons from any particular level to make progress, but just a large number of total moons to unlock the secret levels. It was only at this point that I felt like I could just hang out in the levels I liked the most and collect as many moons as I might stumble across there without returning to levels that bored me, and with the bonus of a whole slew of extra moons having been unlocked by beating the game. It's almost as if the true game doesn't even begin until the game is over, yet the motivation to continue at this point is significantly lessened, on account of the fact that there is no longer any narrative stakes, nor the constant desire to see what the next level will be. I had enjoyed the game enough and felt shocked enough by the brevity of the story that I decided to go for the secret level, but the continued experience just felt like more of the same. I still think it might have been the most fun that I had with the game, since I was able to just hang out in my favorite levels at my leisure for a while, but as soon as I actually reached the dark side of the moon and realized I was going to have to fight all those goddamn evil rabbits again, I lost interest in continuing. God, I hate those fucking rabbits. As boss fights, they're incredibly basic and easy, and as character designs, they are utterly repugnant. I'm sure the logic here is that they're supposed to be ugly and uncool because they're bad guys, but they're just repulsive. Bowser looks fantastic in this game, especially with his suave comb-over and tuxedo, and I love what they've done with some of the classic Mario baddies like the Goombas and their stackability, but most of the new adversaries are just god-awful and unmemorable. There are certain Mario designs which I'm always excited to see brought back and lightly transformed in new iterations, but I don't think I'd even notice if most of what appeared in this game ever got used again. At least the bear people are pretty cute, and the bounding mechanic is one of the most unique and fun to play with in the game, but even those guys aren't such a memorable design that they'd stand to become iconic in the way that a Yoshi or a Boo has been. Overall, the art design in Mario Odyssey is just a clusterfuck, and none of it particularly stands out. There was a huge missed opportunity here to take a more audacious multimedia approach in the vein of something like The Amazing World of Gumball if they really wanted to jam a bunch of different art styles into a single adventure. Hell, Yoshi's Crafted World already does a pretty good job of something like that, and is a lot of fun to look at because of it. Odyssey has its moments, like when you look out at the colored clouds surrounding Bowser's floating Japanese-style castle, or the pink magma and gradient fort creatures of the Luncheon Kingdom, but for everything like that, you get something like Metro City, which is populated by these fugly-ass Sonic 06 expats who for some reason are led by a proper goddamn Mario character that doesn't look like she belongs there at all, and throws the whole goddamn logic of the place into question. I'm really just shocked that NPC models this awful made it into a Nintendo game. Sound design in Mario Odyssey is likewise a bit all over the place. There are certainly some great and memorable tunes here and there, but also some repetitive and boring ones that brought the atmosphere at certain levels even further down from where the shiny sheen was already pulling them. Mario's noises easily became grating, especially for someone like me who can't stand to walk at normal speed instead of constantly long jumping. I don't want to harp on this too much since it wasn't that big a deal, but my point is just that it's one more thing which wasn't as good as I know it could be and has been in other Nintendo games. The whole of this world can't help but seem underexplored to me. Sure, there are plenty of secret challenges and moons stuck into the nooks and crannies of each level, but why are they all so small? Why are the challenges so short and straightforward? I can't think of any individual challenge in this game that stood out in the way that some of those in Mario 64 did, and too many of the levels are too similar to ones from that game as well. We managed to have 2 different takes on a fire level, an underwater beach and ice level, 2 types of jungle-esque levels, 2 kinds of castles, and a city. Why is it that the cat Trap Kingdom and Luncheon Kingdoms are the only ones with truly unique concepts and color aesthetics. I feel like any of the Mario RPGs did a much better job of creating a diverse and imaginative world full of unique locations that actually made you feel like you were on a huge sprawling adventure and not a replay of the hits. If I seem overly harsh on Mario Odyssey for having said that I liked the game before, it's only because it's so much easier to remember the problems that I had with it than the experience itself. The entire time I felt this strange duality of playing a game that was perfectly fine and a generically playable experience the likes of which I grew up with as a gamer, but constantly being frustrated that there wasn't more to it. Even if a game like Mario Sunshine didn't have as smooth of controls or as dense a world with as much variety and as modern a death system, I at least remember what the hell that game was about and what each part of it felt like. Mario Odyssey just kinda passed through me without any real feelings at all. It was one of the most passively enjoyable gaming experiences I've had in recent memory, and left me with neither any particular desire to return to it, nor any lasting memory of what I had accomplished therein. And before you think I've just become a jaded old gamer, I'm also playing Splatoon 2 right now, and it's like one of my favorite games of all time. If there is one reason I could see myself playing more Mario Odyssey though, it would really just be because it's so much less frustrating than most of its genre. Banjo-Kazooie is outright infuriating to return to. I may have stronger memories of 64 and Sunshine, but I've never even come close to beating either of them, and I hate the Wii. If I just wanted to dick around and jump on shit with my Nintendo Switch, this is probably the most easily accessible and monotonously satisfying way to do so. Given that I'm more the type to just move on to something new, however, I can't really see myself doing that just for the hell of it. For some people, I think it's reasonable to consider Mario Odyssey a practically perfect game. It has so much stuff to offer that if all or even most of it does anything for you, you're going to get a hell of a lot out of it. If you find it satisfying to play and dedicate yourself to mastering the controls and learning the layout of the levels perfectly, it will become one hell of a toy to mess around with. If I had thought that the world it took place in was cool and just wanted to spend more time in it, I think I'd even be driven to go for 100% completion, because I do think it's fun, even if it isn't necessarily the kind of challenge that I value the most in gaming. But being as uninteresting as it is aesthetically on top of everything else, I think I'll call it quits where I'm at and just watch someone else speedrun it to 100% to get the satisfaction of appreciating what the developers were really able to accomplish with the game. To put a numerical score on my experience, I would give it a 7 out of 10. And that's it for this video. Stick around on my channel if you want to see more like this. Support me on Patreon if you really love what I do. $1 gets you into my Discord. $5 gets access to exclusive podcasts. $15 and I'll rant about anything you want. And $40 I send a package with a USB full of exclusive content straight to your house. I'm also selling t-shirts. I've also got podcasts and other stuff on the channel. A lot of my stuff doesn't get pushed to my subscribers, so make sure you ring the stupid fucking bell. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next one.